And at that point in time, that was really the only beacon of light that I had. I really hadn't had a lot of positive experiences in my life up to that point, but I took to skiing almost immediately. And it was really like the first thing I loved. It still is like one of the things that I love the most in this world. And just knowing that I'd get to go skiing on Saturday was enough to get me through just an awful week at school. And all of this while, I'm having this interesting dichotomy because I'm going to these mountains and I'm getting better and I'm getting better quick. And I can show up to most mountains in the country and ski their hardest runs. And I have like adults praising me for the calculated risks that I take. And then I go back to school and I can't go to the water fountain without being accompanied by a staff member. I can't go to the bathroom without someone standing outside the door.
What if the truth came in a gel cap and we could just pop it in our mouths and forget about it? Well, it doesn't, and we can't. But we can laugh in the face of reality while plotting our survival. Welcome to the Truth Tastes Funny podcast. I am your host, Hersh, and if my guests can handle the truth, so can you. Open wide, folks. Here it comes. When Ryan DeLena was 5 years old, he was placed in a therapeutic school that relied on detrimental methods of behavior modification, such as physical restraint. He was heavily medicated and 4 years later was voluntarily committed to a mental hospital for further evaluation. His parents, Rob and Mary Beth, Rob is with us today, as well as with Ryan, were counseled to place him in a group home, and they refused. Today, Ryan is the youngest person to ski tour in the Arctic and Antarctic regions, having completed expeditions in Antarctica in 2018, Svalbard in 2022, and Baffin Island in 2023. He was featured on the cover of Backcountry Ski Maps. He's climbed and skied peaks in Chile, Argentina, Oregon, Washington, Utah, California, Nevada, Wyoming, and nearly every inch of skiable terrain in the presidential range. He graduated from Vermont State University this year, and when he's not on skis, he's an enthusiastic rock climber, which he's been doing quite a bit of lately, ice climber, and avid hiker, summiting the Grand Teton twice and completing the 100 highest hiking peaks in New England. And with that, I welcome you, Ryan, to Truth Tastes Funny.
Good to be here. Thank you.
It is great to have you. It is great to have you on as well, Rob.
Thank you.
Ryan, let's just start with a kind of a check-in on what you've been doing lately.
Lately, I've been living in Acadia National Park, guiding rock climbing. And when I'm not guiding rock climbing, I'm out rock climbing for my own personal enjoyment with either the other guides or some other friends. So there haven't been a lot of days that I haven't been tied into a rope for the past 4 months.
Well, it's very different being tied into a rope when you're rock climbing and being physically restrained in school because they don't know how to take care of your issues, your personality. Let's jump back to that. What's your first memory of this struggle in school?
My first memory of it, and we talk about this in our book, is when a woman from the therapeutic school that I was going to be transferring to when I was 5 years old came to visit me, and she actually restrained me in the school gym of the other school. So not even on the grounds of the therapeutic school. She took her own liberties to physically pin me face down on the floor and cover my mouth to the point where I felt like I couldn't breathe just because I didn't want to put a pair of foam dice away. And up to that point, I was 5 years old. If I just got up out of class and walked around, nobody really tried to reason with me. Nobody told me that was wrong. So I was under the impression that what I was doing was completely okay. And she put the brakes on me really quickly. And I realized that this school change was going to go a lot differently than I thought it was.
Yeah. So it's an interesting point you make, which is that you were proceeding as though what you were doing was okay. So were you feeling, and Rob can also chime in on this, were you feeling pressure before the school switched to change behaviors or to modify stuff? Or tell me a little more about your perception of how things were going at that young age.
I mean, you got to think about this. Like, what were you doing when you were 5? You know, like most 5-year-olds are watching like Caillou and eating applesauce.
Yeah.
And they were making pretty big decisions about my life based on my behavior as a 5-year-old. And, you know, at that point, if I acted up in school, you know, it was clear that I wasn't like the other kids. I like wasn't as docile, and I wasn't just gonna like sit still and do whatever. Like if I wanted to get up and run around, it was like kind of hard to keep me in my chair. I needed to be just engaged differently. And at that point, if I behaved badly, they sent me home with either a red card, a yellow card, or a green card. Green was good, red was bad. So the little like square of construction paper didn't exactly indicate to me that like, hey, if this keeps up, the rest of your life is going to be severely altered. Because that's what was happening behind the scenes. They were getting ready to move me to therapeutic school and kick me out of the district. But I didn't have any idea that the tracks of my future were about to diverge. I just had this red card.
Yeah. That's a really kind of startling image. You know, I just had this red card. I remember hearing when my older sister was 5 years old, she and my parents were called into the principal's office, and they were informed that she was immature. And the whole idea that they were telling my parents, well, your 5-year-old is immature. It tells you a lot about how schools operate. Rob, share your perspective a little bit.
So I think so much of parental expectations played into this, but also, you know, the construct of school, especially particularly public school at that age when you have 30 kids in a class. I mean, if you had a bunch of 4 and 5-year-olds in, you know, 1800 and you were training them to survive or you know, manage their way in the wild, Ryan would have been the star of the class. He was the, you know, the most athletic, the most adventurous. He was a leader. He was the smartest. But, you know, when you put him in a room full of kids and say, okay, we're all going to sit and color, he was a nightmare. He wanted to see what was under the sink in the classroom. He wanted to know why the light bulb was blown out in the hallway, and he asked a million questions. And, you know, for a public school teacher, it was, you know, difficult. And, you know, right away he was flagged as being different. And, you know, we tried to survive a couple of years in what was, you know, a collaborative or a preschool that was a mix of, you know, special needs kids and regular kids. And by the end of the second year, they had just had enough. And that pushed us into the therapeutic schools. And now as a parent, you have this kid that we thought was gifted, we thought was a superstar, and he was so smart. And all of a sudden they're saying, you know, he can't even go to public school in our town. So you want to fix him. And if the fix was this therapeutic school, it was easy to fall in the trap and think, all right, they must know more than we do. They're going to have some special program that's going to wave a magic wand, and in a couple of years he'll go back to public school and we'll be right back on track. And it was anything but that. It was the worst decision we ever made. Well, there's a few worse decisions, but that was worst decision number one.
Well, tell us a little bit about how that played out.
So I think once he got to therapeutic school, you know, we would get, you know, a written report at the end of the day that he was being held. They called him holds, and they say, well, Ryan had 6 holds today. And it doesn't sound so bad when you say it like that and say, all right,
well, it sounds like an accomplishment in professional wrestling.
Exactly.
You know?
or hugs. Ryan had 6 hugs today.
Right.
You know, and you have to remember, at this point, he's 5. So when he would come home and describe them as they tried to choke me, they tried to tackle me, I was on the ground, you know, we just thought he was exaggerating. And what really changed it for us was we were trained on how to do them at home. And now I'm the man of the house, and I'm, you know, my blood would be boiling when he would act up, and I would follow the training, and I would get behind him and I would hold him and pin him down. And even when he was little, he would wiggle and he would struggle, and this wrestling match would ensue on our kitchen floor. And at the end of it, I couldn't remember why he got in trouble to begin with. I just knew that we had this, and I realized how ridiculous it was after a year or so of doing it. And then we went back to the town and said, hey, we think this is a bad idea. We think the school is using a bad approach. You know, can we just forget we ever did this and come back? And once he was in the therapeutic system, we couldn't get him out. So they would, you know, they would stall us out. buy another year there, it'll get better. Or they would offer up another therapeutic school, which was slightly different in their approach, but in the same, they still had the same methods of either timeout, which led to restraint, or isolation, which as he got older was I think just as damaging, because to lock a kid, especially
Yeah.
when he was by the preteen years, in a room and shut the door and not tell him when you're going to get out, is traumatic. And Ryan can probably speak on that as well.
Yeah, I have some experience with that as well, with that in a dealing with a private, I guess you can call it therapeutic program within a school, whatever it was. But all I can tell you is that for the privilege of engaging with a school like this, they would charge you like $25,000 a year.
Yeah.
And then they had a room that was essentially like a padded cell. It was a isolation room with leather walls and a window. It's shocking. Ryan,
These ones didn't have pads or a window. You could break your knuckles on it if you wanted to.
Oh, nice. Okay, so Ryan, pick up the story from there.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much to it. I mean, there's a lot to it, but essentially, we get to year 4 at that first therapeutic school, which I'm not going to try and name because I can never remember the fake names, and I don't want to get all of us sued. So, yeah, we finish up at the first school, and now we're kind of essentially screwed because I have full-blown PTSD, and the
you're
only
9,
options
you're
they're
basically
giving
9.
us is like, yeah, I'm 9 years old at this point, and they're like, you can go to a worse school that's more restrictive, or you can stay where you're at. You can't go to somewhere that's better unless you do a year at one of the worst places and everything works out and you prove that you can, behave, and then you go to the next one and then you keep leveling up until you get back to public. And that just wasn't in the cards for me. At this point, when I sensed any conflict with an adult, I would either run into the woods and go climb 60 feet up in a tree and just stay there until they stalled me out, or I would get in a fist fight and end up on the floor, and I'd black out. I couldn't remember how these things started. I would feel guilty after them. I'd feel stupid for making a mountain out of a molehill. But as soon as I sensed that conflict, I just went right into fight or flight. So there was no year of good behavior in the cards for me. I had some real healing to do, and I needed to be removed from that stressor. And we just didn't have that option. So I ended up doing a 2-week stint in a hospital, which was probably rock bottom. And it was a miracle I even got out of there. I was only supposed to be there for a day. I ended up being there for 2 weeks because of just how poorly it went. And then I started at another school. And honestly, if it wasn't for some of the interns there, they had some people who weren't really as subscribed to the method. They had some 20-something interns who probably just didn't agree with putting little kids on the floor and in these wrestling matches, and they would try and talk it out with me more and kind of help me realize hey, this doesn't always need to end this way. We can have a small problem and let it stay a small problem. And I went to 2 or 3 schools after that. 2 more before I ended up finally getting back to public when I was in high school. All the while this is going on, my dad and I had been skiing together. We discovered skiing when I was 7 years old, so 2 years before school number 1 blew up.
Right.
And at that point in time, that was really the only beacon of light that I had. I really hadn't had a lot of positive experiences in my life up to that point, but I took to skiing almost immediately. And it was really the first thing I loved. It still is one of the things that I love the most in this world. And just knowing that I'd get to go skiing on Saturday was enough to get me through just an awful week at school. And all of this while, I'm having this interesting dichotomy because I'm going to these mountains and I'm getting better, and I'm getting better quick. And I can show up to most mountains in the country and ski their hardest runs. And I have adults praising me for the calculated risks that I take. And then I go back to school and I can't go to the water fountain without being accompanied by a staff member. I can't go to the bathroom without someone standing outside the door.
Right. And that, and you can share your perspective, Rob, but it flies against our instincts as just as human beings. And I feel like, it's this desire for conformity that we understand that makes authority figures' lives easier.
Right. And then it's important to add the missing piece to that puzzle is the medical profession and the pharmaceutical industry, because once you have a kid who's been flagged as different, pill number one is going to come, and then pill number two, and then pill number three, and this one's going to be the one that does it. And well, if we combine these two, and Ryan at any one time, for most of his preteen years, was on, two antipsychotics and a mood stabilizer, and and different ones for depression, and his physical health really deteriorated. He got very heavy, and his cholesterol was off the charts, and his blood pressure was bad. And that was always the answer, and that was part of the hospital stint, was to get his medicine right. And in the book, he had a bad side effect to one of them that was really almost a really bad situation. And it wasn't until we found a new psychiatrist, and I think he was able to take a fresh approach and look at him. And he was really one of these guys that drilled down on the physical aspects and saying, you seeing enough benefit to justify all this harm. And I didn't think there was any benefit, because I knew when we went skiing, and if we missed meds or we went away and I forgot to give him the med, I never saw any difference in him. I just knew he was better away from school and better away from the conformity, like you said, in a world where he was free, able to take risk, where he was rewarded for that risk rather than criticized, and where he was able to be himself. And if I could just put him there all the time, I wouldn't have had to medicate him. I wouldn't have to do anything. I just couldn't figure out a world where he only skied, and where we I debated, like, I'm just going to move to the woods. I'll get a cabin. He and I will live out our days. But I had a wife who worked in Cambridge as a biotech lawyer. I had a daughter who was in school, and it wasn't realistic. But
yeah,
but
that's.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish.
I was going to say, what I really, really needed to realize was, instead of taking him to skiing all the time, I needed to take skiing back to our regular everyday life, and say, Ryan needs to be free, and Ryan needs to be able to, have agency over his own decisions. And that's what changed, I think, was I finally just accepted that I didn't need to fix him. He was fine. He was more than fine. He was the best kid, I could have hoped for. It just took me a long time to see it.
Well, and I think one of the things that that parents and kids come up against is that we can't control the environment, right, for someone's entire life. So the idea that, well, Ryan's great when he's skiing is, it wasn't necessarily the answer, right? Like you say, the answer was, how do I bring the mindset of and the peace of mind from skiing into everyday life? And also, how do we look at education? So I'm interested, Ryan, in when you were realizing that there was that dichotomy, what was the next step toward resolving that?
The next step was getting out of therapeutic schools. And at this point, I had aged out of the one that was going well for me, and I really didn't have a ton of options. And I went to the school number 3. Again, I'm annoyed that I can't just say the name, so that I'm just like doing my thing. And school number 3 was a disaster. I mean, this place was run like a prison camp, and it did not fit well with me at all. And at this point, I'm getting to the age where I'm starting to, develop my thinking mind beyond, that of like being like a 7-year-old, and you're like, thinking in terms of what's going to get me my Oreos after dinner, and like being an early teenager and starting to think about like what's right and wrong, what is just in the world. And that place was really soul crushing, because I saw a lot of kids who reminded me a lot of me, who shouldn't be there and were losing out on an education because they have to teach to the lowest common denominator. And, they didn't have behavioral issues. They didn't have cognitive issues. They just got in trouble at school, and they got kicked out of their schools and sent here. And my sister, who was 2 grades below me, was getting the same work that we were. And I was like, I need to get out of here. And all of these people need to get out of here too, because we're all going to get to college and we're going to be screwed. We're not going to know how to do anything. And I would like smuggle in my sister's homework and be like, she's in 7th grade. We're in 9th grade. Are you not enraged? Look at this. And I'd show it to the class, and they all of their mentalities were crushed. They were like, if we went back to public school, we wouldn't be able to do any of this. There'd be too much homework, like, and their mindset was already defeated. They already had sacrificed their belief in themselves. And I had to get to this point where I'm like, I can't save anybody but myself. I need to figure out how to get out of here. And I was at the point where I was like, if this goes on any longer, I'm just going to have to drop out of school because I'm just going nowhere with this. And I would talk to the administrators and I'm like, why can't I have any freedom? Why do I have to stay here? I can go to Chile with my dad. I can travel internationally, and I'm not currently in Chilean prison. Why can't I walk to the water fountain? And they were like, well, that's your preferred activity. And it's like, that was what they were missing, is like, I didn't need the elements of skiing in that I needed to be able to do whatever I want, whenever I wanted, or it was going to be a disaster. I just needed agency over my own decisions. I needed to be able to pilot my life because I didn't do everything I wanted to when I was skiing. I followed the rules to the degree that I needed to live the life that I wanted to. And I wasn't going to break certain rules because I didn't want to jeopardize what I had. In those schools, I had nothing. So about the time I'm ready to quit, my dad gets in a heated argument and screams at some people in a meeting. And we managed to get to a woman in the chain of command in like the school system who we hadn't been able to get to yet, basically by him dropping some F-bombs and, getting people a little nervous. And that woman, correct me if I'm wrong, because I wasn't in this meeting. I know about this from third hand knowledge, or just like it's been passed to the book and then passed to me. We get into a discussion with this lady who recommends this program that's sort of adjacent to Acton-Boxborough High School. And it's like you can take public school classes, but you stay in this school with like 15 people. And they said if I should go there, they don't do restraints. And if I can stay there for a year, I can go back to public. So I go to this school, and that was almost worse in a way because they knew that I wanted to go back to public and they really didn't want me to. And if I showed any emotion other than like content or happy, they would just like lean over my shoulder and be like, they're not going to accept that when you get back to public school. And it just kind of cracked me because I had to become a robot and I had to hold my tongue for a lot of stuff. But finally they did let me return, and point proven, I didn't instantly end up in Supermax prison when I went back to public school. I actually didn't really get in trouble that much. I got decent grades. I had a lot of friends. I was a participating member of clubs and community, and I relaxed because there wasn't the constant threat that I could be put on the floor if I said the wrong thing or like, walked outside of the line. Like I knew I could get in trouble if I did the wrong thing, but it wasn't dangerous to my life. I might have to like go talk to the principal or something. And as a result, I think it made me better behaved because I wasn't on edge so much. I didn't feel like I had to make a counter move to protect myself.
Yeah. So looking back at this stuff, what do you each think it says, first of all, about society today that you had to go through this, this kind of horrific journey that seems completely unnecessary?
I'll say, I take responsibility for a lot of this. I had tremendous guilt when we wrote the book, and I had to work through a lot of it because, these decisions were my wife and mine. And I think when I look at my own behavior and my own expectations and what I wanted Ryan to be, and I wanted him to be a better version of me and be more successful and go to Harvard and go and be a doctor or a lawyer. A lot of that played into those decisions. And when you have a kid who struggles and really struggles, or a kid who, isn't born with the advantages that other kids are, and you shift that paradigm to, I just want my son or daughter to be happy for 5 minutes. And that's when you reach that point, you recalibrate everything. And I
Mhm.
recalibrated my expectations for him and hopefully for my daughter. My daughter might argue that I haven't in her case, but I try to. I catch myself. Old patterns do, die hard. And sometimes because she was the typically developing kid, I do, pressure her somewhat. And I try to remember, that what's important. And I think that played a part in the decisions. And then the people in the chain, the doctors and the educators, they were doing their job. I mean, they're part of a system where they, if you get off at a certain floor at a hospital, if you get off at the surgery floor, you're probably going to be recommended a surgery. I mean, that's the system that we're in. And if you head to a special needs school, they're going to tell you that, being restrained is going to help you, or that, their method of timeout and isolation is better. And there are parts of those schools that are great. Individual education plans are great. Small classes, previewing transitions, all things that some kids will benefit from. All of that stuff can be good. But when they start putting their hands on your kid and telling you that that's going to help them, it's time to reevaluate things.
Now, one thing interestingly that has not come up yet in our conversation is diagnoses or labels. Ryan, were there labels associated with? There probably were, but but you tell me.
It's really interesting. One of the last conversations I had with my therapist, I've since transitioned out of doing weekly therapy. And that was like kind of a big step. But one of the last conversations I had was that he essentially told me, you definitely have some ADHD, and I haven't harped on medicating it because the lifestyle you live, you benefit a lot from having the extra energy. And I wouldn't want to have you be in a more sedated state just to have more focus. So if it's not becoming a problem, we shouldn't treat it that way. And that was probably what I had my whole life. I feel like we know more about ADHD than we do now, because I think we think of it as like the inability to focus on anything. And I was always, if I wanted to be, I could laser focus. So I was kind of screened out for that early on. But hyperfocus is a trait of ADHD. It's just not always reliable, You can get it when you're passionate about something, but maybe not when you need to do math problems or whatnot. I feel like learning about ADHD in my adult life has validated a lot of what I feel. But I think for a lot of my life, the earlier attempts to diagnose me were detrimental in a way. And this is kind of the dichotomy of diagnosis, because some people they just want to put words to what they're feeling that makes them different than what they know is supposed to be normal. And it can give people a lot of understanding and sort of empathy towards themselves. But I also think it can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it was very interesting. Essentially, when I was a teenager and I was starting to think about, desiring connection with a girlfriend or with a group of friends, wanting belongingness. And at that point, they were trying to tell me that I had an autism spectrum disorder and that I had some sort of mood disorder that was adjacent to bipolar disorder or an early bipolar. And they basically, they tell you you're probably going to have a really hard time controlling your emotions and you're probably going to have a really hard time connecting socially. And it made me hopeless because I'm there's so many people who don't have that and have control over their emotions and can connect easily with other people. So what's the point of even trying? I'm not going to make any friends. And if I do, I'm probably going to flip out one day and scare them all away. So then, you come to these monthly IEP meetings and they're Ryan doesn't seem to be making any friends and he seems to be sad and upset all the time.
Yeah.
Seems like the diagnosis is ringing true. And then, having my therapist kind of shatter the glass ceiling for me of I think that, you're not what they say you are. I don't think that these diagnoses are true. All of a sudden it put the ball back into my court. And rather than behave of, well, it's hopeless, there's nothing I can do about it, to the only thing standing between me and the life I want is my decision making, I completely changed. And I started putting myself out there more. I got back to public. I sat at every lunch table and just struck up a conversation with people. I was asking people out. I ended up, having a girlfriend by the end of that summer. And I also ended up going off all of my medications, and I didn't turn into like a manic individual. I was actually ended up being pretty level-headed and just saw the world with more color than I did. You know, I felt emotions more deeply, but not in a way that was dangerous. And having all of that work out could have only happened when I threw away the diagnoses they thought belonged to me. So I feel like that self-fulfilling prophecy is so dangerous, because how much of it is really the limitations of your brain and how much of it is you just giving up?
Yeah.
First, can I just say that's a really important question, because
Yeah.
Ryan's diagnosis was pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified, PDD-NOS, which is at the time, and it still, I think to this day, is used as this sort of catch-all bucket category when they don't really know what to do with you. But that diagnosis leads to services. So originally we thought, all right, they have to call it something, and then once we have that, the town's going to pay for everything. So we thought, this is like a lottery ticket, right? They're going to pay for this private school and all, they're going to bus them there, and this is going to be great. But once you have a diagnosis, it does become self-fulfilling, like Ryan said. That leads to therapeutic schools. That leads to medication. I mean, from a PDD-NOS diagnosis, which really is like saying your kid's a little different and we don't really know why.
Right.
For that to lead to 2 antipsychotic medicines and antidepressants and mood stabilizers, I mean, we ended up medicating him like he was bipolar when he really wasn't. And it was a slippery slope how we got there. It was just a series of little dumb decisions along the way. And all while it's happening, you keep thinking you're doing the right thing. So I'd be careful of labels, and that's not to disparage, anybody who has one. I think for some people, it is the ticket to a different life once you know and accept, okay, I am different. But in Ryan's case, I think he was mislabeled, from the start, and it really led to derailing a life that could have gone really, really sideways. Luckily, we got lucky with skiing and his just refusal to give in, and maybe mine and my wife's as well. And he ended up in a pretty good place.
So now we kind of come full circle. Ryan, let's leave the audience with maybe, first of all, just what's next on your agenda. When people talk about, I talk about this with my clients in the branding space all the time, mountains to climb, but you actually have mountains to climb, and you have mountains you've climbed and slopes to ski. But what's next on the agenda for you?
Next, so I'm wrapping up my last week of guiding here, and then I'm going to go on a road trip out west with my partner Jess. We're gonna go to Yosemite National Park, try and climb some massive rock walls, sleep in a portaledge on the side of the cliff. Then I come back to the Northeast for the winter. I've been working on a challenge to ski everything in the guidebook for the presidential range. It's called presidential skiing. I have 8 left, so I'm hoping I can seal the deal, but obviously conditions are king. And if you don't have the snowpack for it or the weather, then you can't do it. And as always, I've become an expedition skier. We really didn't have time to get into some of the places I've gotten to ski and kind of the ski side of the journey. But, I've been to the Arctic and the Antarctic twice and have a couple first known descents to my name. Nothing super significant, but stuff that's pretty far out there. And I'm always trying to go those places on the map that you look at and wonder, like, I wonder if anyone ever goes there. I wonder if anything's cool over there. I don't like to disclose anything too early on, especially when plans aren't officially made. But hopefully this spring, another big expedition to a pretty wild place to do some skiing that's rarely done, if ever done. And I'll have some media for that if it goes.
Well, that's great. Well, we'll be following you. And then maybe, I think that as a parent, as a human, I feel like we all think we're different, which is funny because we are all different. It's just sometimes society that prefers the conformity. But for anyone watching or listening who's struggling with that notion that they're not fitting, they're not the square, object in the square space, what advice can you share?
I mean,
Ryan,
Oh.
don't forget to tell them about our book. I mean, that's step number one, right?
Oh my God. He asked what we were doing. That's kind of been done, but that is important, huh?
Well, I think it's a guide of if you want to read about how it can go really wrong for parents, and then how a kid can really change his destiny by just refusing to give up. I think our book Without Restraint is the story. But Ryan, I'll let you pick it up.
Yeah, I was gonna say, skiing ended up being my niche, and I found ways to monetize that. And skiing led to rock climbing, which has led to where I'm at now, which is taking people rock climbing professionally. And I'm kind of exploring the depth of the avenue of how I can use sharing my passions for skiing and climbing to get other people out there in the mountains and having experiences and get me making money. It's like, it's a harder road to take, but it's not an impossible road. And I know plenty of people who are making a living doing it. So, that's where I'm at. And if you're different, if you don't fit into the norm, you just have to find your niche. What are you good at, and how can you make a living doing what you're good at and what you enjoy? And, not everybody is going to be a graduate with a master's degree or a PhD or, whatever. You don't have to go the doctor or the lawyer route. And we need more people being great at what they're good at than, being bad at being a doctor or a lawyer. So whether you're going to become a traveling musician or an electrician, you just kind of got to find your way in this world, and don't worry about what other people have to say about it. You only have to worry about what works for you.
That's great. And Rob, what about your perspective, given how things have kind of unfolded?
Yeah, I mean, it's changed me as a person. I mean, not just, as a parent, but I mean, I was a beginner skier when we stepped on the magic carpet, when Ryan was 7 and I was about 40, and he got so good so fast that I had to keep up with him, and I had to get better or die. And I faced some situations that I was not comfortable being in, and I had to push through that. And then all of a sudden we start traveling New England, and then the country, and then the world. And I met some of the most amazing people along the way, some really great friends. Ben Brousseau, who's a guide out in Big Sky, Montana, who's turned us on to this whole world and led to Antarctica. I mean, the fact that I can say I've been to Antarctica twice to ski is somewhat laughable. If you knew me in my 30s, it's not something you would have expected. And it's pushed me to get outside my comfort zone and see the world and challenge myself and get in better shape and be healthier. And Ryan, I've learned more about health and fitness from Ryan than anybody, and diet and exercise and all of those things that contribute to healthy living. And I see the way he lives, and it's strange to have your son, teach you, but he's taught me so much about life. And I think it's been a crazy journey. It's not over yet, and who knows where we'll go next. And that's the way I look at it.
Thanks so much for tuning into Truth Tastes Funny. If you enjoyed the experience, please leave a 5-star review and share this podcast with your friends.